From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
A billing error that's hurting those who need help the most. Plus, a new idea for Kansas taxes, one rate for all. Who would see the biggest cuts? But first, the governor says the state of the state is strong as she makes the case for her plans for Kansas this year. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. This is Kansas Week, and I'm your host, Pilar Pedraza. It came a couple weeks late after a false positive COVID scare for the governor, but she finally got to have her big night, laying out her priorities for state lawmakers and Kansas voters. We take a look at them with Rebecca Chung of the KSN Capitol Bureau.
Well, axing taxes is at the top of the governor's list. There have been calls on both sides of the aisle for tax relief this year, but the governor is pushing her Axing Your Taxes plan. The governor's plan includes getting rid of the state's food sales tax this year. Republicans negotiated a gradual reduction last year, but it drops the tax to zero in 2025. The governor's plan also includes eliminating the tax on diapers and feminine hygiene products. And it would also create a sales tax holiday for back-to-school items and cut Social Security taxes.
We are in this position to responsibly provide tax relief because we have been laser focused on creating a solid fiscal foundation for our state. But let me make myself clear. I will stand against any irresponsible tax proposals that erode that foundation.
Some of the other issues the governor is focusing on this year include legalizing medical marijuana. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are working on a bill to be introduced in the Senate. And the governor is once again pushing for Medicaid expansion, despite pushback from Republicans in the past. And another key message that she shared tonight is her desire to work across the aisle to get things done. She's asking lawmakers to meet her in the middle this year. For now, reporting at the Capitol, I'm Rebecca Chung.
Now, the governor's speech, heavy on ideas. Not so many surprises, though, as we'd already seen her proposed budget. Here to put all of this in perspective with us, we've got Dion Leffler, the opinion editor from the Wichita Eagle, who was up at the State House with me Tuesday night, as were State Representative Blake Carpenter, Republican from Derby and the new Speaker Pro Tem, and State Representative Democrat Casey Ohibasam from Wichita. Thank you all so much for joining me.
Thank you. Yes,
and Diane, I'm going to start with you. This was kind of a very unusual State of the State address.
Yes, it was, particularly when it came to medical marijuana. I have never heard a governor ever advocate for that in the State of the State address. I've heard it, on the campaign trail and such, but to bring that out as a priority like that, and to cite two articles that ran in the Wichita Eagle, one that I wrote and another that was a guest column about suffering people who were denied the relief that they might get from medical marijuana. That was kind of a cool deal.
Yeah. And talking about medical marijuana, that was kind of one of the unusual moments of coincidence, shall we say, of agreement between the two sides. As we were watching from my position the speech go on, there were lots of times when the Democrats gave standing ovations, but only a couple times when Republicans stood up, and that was one of them.
So I think that, the medical marijuana issue has been around for obviously several years. We're one of the last states in America. There's, I think, about maybe 9 states that haven't done anything as far as the medical marijuana or marijuana in general goes. But that being the case, I think that, the House passed it 2 years ago. And so that's why I think the action's on the Senate this year to see where it goes. And then ultimately, I've been hearing rumors out of Washington, D.C. that they're considering moving it from a Schedule 1 to Schedule 2 drug. And if that's the case, then it's no longer an illegal substance. And so I don't even have an inkling of what that does to the debate in Topeka regarding marijuana in general, whether it's recreational or medical, or what would the result of that action be.
Okay, very quickly for those who are not in the know, Schedule 1 versus Schedule 2, what's that?
So Schedule 1 is basically where you have your hard drugs, your narcotics, things that the DEA will raid your house for, and yes, fentanyl, and you will be arrested. Whereas Schedule 2 is more along the lines of prescription or you can actually have access to it. But then at that point, if they move it to Schedule 2, well, then at the state level, it would still be a felony, whereas the federal level, it would no longer be a felony charge at that point in time.
Would that change, do you think, how your party goes about pushing for legalization?
Well, it won't change it, and because, like, the Speaker Pro Tem has said, 2 years ago, we actually passed it in the House. And, there is, up until today, bipartisan support for medical marijuana. And I do have to thank the Speaker Pro Tem because he was the one that carried the bill that particular day, and he did fantastic. He was phenomenal presenting the bill to the House. And, to have that bipartisan support definitely is needed. And there's no doubt in my mind that if it is brought up again, and of course, this past off season, there was a task force looking at medical marijuana, and there was a lot of things that they added on and to actually strengthen it. So I think there's bipartisan support. I think that there's nothing from our side to stop it. I think it should actually go forward. And I applaud, our colleagues on the other side. This is an area that we do have common ground, and we should actually do pass it.
Now, the one other issue that I really noticed a lot of agreement on was on the water crisis that the state is facing. And that is something that the governor has really been pushing since the campaign, Casey.
That is correct. And that's something that's actually a problem that we actually are facing right now in terms of our water usage, particularly in Western Kansas. I am, very confident that on the House side, Speaker Hawkins appointed Representative Minix to lead the Water Committee, and I think he's going to, their committee is going to actually present some recommendations as to what we need to do to actually prolong, the water issues in on the western part of the state. Most of it has to do with conservation, and I think there's going to be a lot of talk about it, but I'm hopeful that the committee led by Representative Minix will bring out some bills that will actually help us in terms of our water usage.
And talking about that, certainly a very interesting piece. I believe it was from the Kansas News Service this week. I think it actually originated out from the High Plains NPR, but about the 7 worst drought cities, all Western Kansas. Garden City, I believe it was, just about 5 inches of rain for the entire year.
Yeah. I hear conservation, and conservation is always good, but where are we going to get more water? I think, are we going to have the will, I guess, to be able to build reservoirs, to capture, there's runoff, there's all there's rainfall, I don't think this is a problem that gets solved with just conservation, because it's agricultural use that's the problem.
True, and I will say that everything is on the table in terms of this particular problem. This is not a partisan issue. This is actually something that's real, and we have to really come to the table. Everything, whether it's for us either farmers using less water, or crops that are dependent on more water. It will be on the table. And like I said, I'm hopeful and confident that recommendations will come out as to what we can do, whether to build more reservoirs or whether to, build more man-made lakes or something. Everything is on the table. That's what I can say.
I came from California. We know drought, and we are not to watering on Wednesdays and painting your yard green yet.
Yeah.
So hopefully we won't get there.
Yeah. Well, and just as we saw, lots of details in there, even on points where there are great swaths of agreement. We have to deal with those details. Bipartisanship was one of the themes running through the governor's speech, calling for both parties to work together for the best of Kansas this year. So what did lawmakers think about that? I asked them. The answer was mixed. The governor got plenty of cheers for her 2023 legislative agenda, but most of it really came only from her own party. Republicans sat and listened for the most part. They liked some of what they heard.
I think there were things, particularly for me, mental health. As you know, Sedgwick County area region has been lacking in state institution beds. So now we have that opportunity to bring some beds to our area.
But leadership still had reservations.
I think what'll be interesting is as far as early childhood development goes that she brought up. What I want to know is that before or after the child's born.
In a pre-recorded response to the governor's plans, Senate President Ty Masterson approved of the concept of bipartisanship while still highlighting the role of the Republican supermajority.
Regardless of who attempts to take credit, I'm optimistic we will find more common ground.
Democrats remain hopeful, though admit getting agreement on the details of their ideas could be problematic.
There is some momentum right now in terms of us getting a lot of things done, particularly with medical marijuana. Also with making sure we're fully funding education. I did like the idea that the governor puts out in terms of actually making sure that we actually get the sales tax.
Political analysts remind us most of what comes out of the Kansas State House is bipartisan in nature.
When the governor said let's not politicize schools and so forth, that did not get bipartisan support. So I think we're going to have some more culture war stuff too.
And that definitely seems to be the way it's building up from what I'm seeing on the outside. What about you guys? What are you seeing? In a leadership position there, Blake, what are you seeing?
So I think that there are areas that we are going to work with each other on, and here's the thing. When she comes out and gives a speech, we saw it at the beginning of the segment, that you have to pass a common sense tax plan, but if you pass something that I don't like, I'm going to veto it. So she tells us that she wants to work with us, but then she also threatens a veto in her speech as well. And so I think you have to look at those dynamics. And so she does give the hint of it's my way or the highway, but it's okay, well, let's have a conversation. What does the flat tax actually look like? And I believe it would be better for Kansans as having that flat tax. We've seen other states do it, and it'll help decrease taxes and widen the base. And that is ultimately where we can have everybody on the same playing field, and ultimately we can start getting rid of some of these extra tax exemptions that we have out there, to where that we're all playing basically the same rules and everything else like that. Now, that being said, whether it's the abortion issue, education issues, I mean, there's going to be things that we agree on, there's going to be things that we don't agree on. But I think that for the most part, like for right now, I talked to the governor's chief of staff this last week, and I'm working on IT issues with the governor's office. And so I think that there's some things that we can do to improve security within the administration as far as cybersecurity for the agencies, that type of stuff. And so I'm looking to work with her office in order to make it to where we can actually build out that program for the cybersecurity to make sure that all of Kansas data is as safe as possible.
Yeah. What about you, Casey? What are you saying?
Well, just like the Speaker Pro Tem has said, it's important that we do work together. I mean, of course, that's why all 165 members are there, 125 in the House, 40 in the Senate. It is important that we actually put aside our differences, whether it's working on tax cuts, whether it's working on education, whether it's working on the things that actually our state faces, like water, security. You just talked about it, But if there's a situation where there are, I should say, some members that, how I say, will like to hijack the process and say, you know what, we're going to be offering amendments or offering bills that are contrary to working together, then of course the governor will have to step in and say, hey, look, this is not the way or the route we should take. All of us should need to be in the middle and basically govern from there. So that's what I'm seeing. I'm very hopeful that we are going to be working together across the aisle. There are a lot of things that I agree with the Speaker Pro Tem, and
one thing
we have our disagreements, but yeah.
I got to tell you though, what people don't see is this dynamic very often. But I mean, like Casey and I, we get along really, really well, and actually a lot of us do. It's just like any workplace environment. Yeah, you have some personalities that clash, but ultimately, if you look at a lot of our voting records up there in Topeka, it's naming bridges or it's changing little things in the statutes. 90 to 95% of it is not controversial. It's that last 5 to 10% that we just are diametrically, have different opinions about. And so it's really the small things that we end up having those clashes on.
And of course, that's what you and I end up covering, is the stuff they fight about. And
well, of course. I mean, that's the stuff that matters. I mean, name your bridge whatever you want to name it. We don't care. But I did want to mention there was one reaction to this speech that I found pretty much reprehensible, and that was Senate President Ty Masterson. I had written a story about a gentleman in Hayes. He was dying of cancer, and his hospital room was raided for marijuana. He had a THC paste that he put on bread, and he had a vape pen, and those things were confiscated from him. They brought charges against him. Ultimately, they dropped the charges, but he spent the last Christmas of his life believing that he was still under indictment, basically. And Ty Masterson's response to that was, when the governor raised that in her speech, was that she was trying to get marijuana to a guy who couldn't even breathe, and that he wasn't going to be shamed into it by bad examples. And I just found that to be just as callous a statement as I think I've ever heard from a legislator. And so I did call him out on it in a column. But as we talk about the marijuana issue, I think we need to really recognize that, you know, there are people who say what gets voted on, and there are people who say what doesn't get voted on, and Ty Masterson's one of those people.
And just for transparency's sake, and for anybody who doesn't remember this, you're the opinion page editor of the Eagle, not a day-to-day journalist per se.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so that kind of changes.
And columnist.
Yeah, and columnist. But
Yes.
that changes the types of things that you do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So moving on, everyone agrees Kansas has the money for a tax cut or two. The question is, who gets it and where does the cut come? Cake's Jackson Overstreet takes a look at one proposed single rate or flat tax that came up this week.
As the snowflakes fly in Kansas, reminding people that it's winter, another season has slowly creeped in. Tax season. And your taxes have been one of the big talking points in the state legislature this year.
We want something flatter, fairer, and lower for our constituents.
I'm hopeful that we will see property tax relief for residential homeowners.
Lawmakers have introduced one set of bills with the backing of the Kansas Chamber of Commerce that would change the state's income tax rates. If passed, those rates would go from 3.1%, 5.25%, and 5.7%, depending on your income, to a 5% flat rate for everyone after $15,000 for individuals and $30,000 for joint couples. The bill would also make the corporate tax rate 5%.
When you get to the upper wage earners, they're the ones that are going to see the savings.
The state has a budget surplus of around $2 billion right now, and that's what Dr. Neil Allen from Wichita State says is behind this new plan. However, he says lawmakers will be split on the potential changes.
If enacted, would have more benefits to high-income Kansans and high-earning corporations than it would for the rest of the population. And that makes it a difficult sell to Democrats and to a lot of more moderate Republicans.
All right, so this is something that you kind of mentioned earlier, Blake. Obviously something leadership at this point, it sounds like, supports. How do you sell it?
So looking at it, I think that as we look at states that, like Florida, Texas, Tennessee, Washington, states that don't have zero income tax are states that people are moving to. And for Kansas to maintain and keep our population, because we've been losing people for quite some time now, and we have to make it to where either you're going to raise your family here, you're going to be able to retire here, and so we have to look at the whole gambit, not just income tax, but also property taxes, sales taxes. What does our tax structure look like? And so I think that this is just one aspect that we're looking at. And as we hopefully are able to create a tax environment that incentivizes people to move here as we get new businesses that come in, whether it's the $4 billion projects that come into the state, it's one of those things that we need to look at as to keep people here and ultimately make it to where as we move forward, if we get more and more population, then there's some trigger mechanisms in there that responsibly starts lowering the income taxes here within the state of Kansas to maybe some of like what the other states have around the country, whether it's 2 or 3%, because then everybody gets to share in that 2 to 3% at that point in time.
Now, the economic term for this, of course, is a regressive tax, and it's why it's a form of tax that Democrats have historically opposed.
Well, yes, we've kind of opposed regressive tax, but just to go back to what the Speaker Pro Tem has talked about with respect to keeping the flat tax, remember the last time we cut tax here in the state of Kansas, that was when the Brownback era, and that actually messed up the economy. So right now, I think that this is coming from me, that I think that we should actually do some kind of study to find out what actually would work, a model that would work in terms of providing tax cut. But for now, I think that we should actually keep everything the way it is, because we do have a lot of things that need to be paid for, which is fully funding education, special ed, our roads, our bridges. Yes, our tax structures are kind of complex, but at the same time, take a look at where we were at before. the tax cuts were enacted by Sam Brownback, we were actually losing revenue. We were actually, our state bond ratings were down, our credit ratings were down, businesses were not coming in. So we actually reversed that to a state that we've seen it reversed in terms of our movement with respect to our bond ratings or credit ratings, which is actually to help the state sell for the fact that we have Panasonic and other businesses coming in, whether it's in Manhattan, Dodge City. I hope we're going to be working on something coming into Central County, but we need to be going upward in terms of our revenue collections, just in case, we have some kind of, downfall in the future.
I know when it comes to taxes, most of my viewers say simpler, at least, is better.
Yes, but it might not be. You pay for that simplicity. Particularly if you're a lower income person. So frankly, tax reform in Kansas scares me because I have seen it before and it didn't work. And the Kansas Chamber of Commerce, I'm not sure is the best indicator of what's best for the ordinary citizens of Kansas. I really don't think that, all states have a tax burden. Okay, you got zero income tax. Well, you pay it back in property tax, you pay it back in sales taxes. These states don't run on less money, they just get it from a different pot. So that Kansas has always had the three-corner stool theory of having, of basically splitting it up between sales, property, and income, and that seems to be what works pretty well. And I just, like I say, I've seen us go down this road, and it did not lead to a very good place.
And Blake, I'd say a lot of Kansans have that same gut reaction.
So I think that, it's within the last decade, there was an attempt before my time in the state legislature, I want to point that out, there was a time when the Senate and the House didn't get along very well, and there was, different types of mentalities that control one body versus the other, and I think that infighting is what ultimately produced a tax policy that gives people that initial gut reaction. But I think that as long as we look at this issue and we do it responsibly, that we can start changing what we can do in the future and ultimately give a better perception of what Kansas is versus based on what people's past reactions have been.
All right, we're gonna have to wait and see on that. But talking about things that didn't quite work out right, some Kansans are seeing their utility bills jump this month 5, 6, even 7 times the amount they usually pay. And it's happening to those who can least afford to pay their bills. My investigation showed it all came down to a billing error.
So I was opening up my Evergy bill and found an interesting amount on there. There was an extra $255.
This is Heather Larson's latest energy bill. She says normally it's around $40 or so for electricity, but this bill is for almost $300.
The only thing on my bill was it said balance transfer, and I didn't know where I would have a balance transfer from. And so Evergy told me that it came from when I was a LEAP recipient in 2021.
Heather called Evergy for answers.
They told me I didn't use all of the money that year, so they were transferring my unused balance back.
What she doesn't understand is why she has to pay back money the government gave to Evergy, money she never saw or handled personally. A former social worker, she's had experience with LEAP, even though her first usage came after a protracted fight with COVID in 2021 that left her unemployed.
I used to sign people up for the LEAP program, and I've never actually seen this happen.
Hi, this is Pilar Pedraza from Cake News in Wichita. We called DCF, which handles the LEAP applications. A spokesman told me the federal government has always taken back any unused LEAP funds at the end of the year. But this year, customers are seeing it because of a billing error of some sort. Because the error was over at Evergy, he didn't have any details about what went wrong. So we're just trying to find out what's going on. So we called Evergy. After sharing Heather's bill and questions with the company, we got this statement saying that LEAP funds are good for 1 year ending in September. Anything left over, Evergy is supposed to return to LEAP. Except this year, quote, the LEAP assistance credit from the program remained on Ms. Larson's bill and was applied to electricity used for October, November, and December. Since Ms. Larson didn't qualify for another round of LEAP funding, the usage for those 3 months needed to be paid by Ms. Larson. In other words, Evergy applied it all to her January bill. The company says it has offered Larson a payment plan. Employed again, she's not worried about the cost.
Fortunately, I can take the hit. You know, $255 isn't going to break me.
She's worried about others who can't.
This is going to affect the people that LEAP is supposed to be helping.
And specifically, she told me about friends and folks that she knows that had $300, $500, $600. One person, $1,700 is this transfer. And even with a payment plan, that's a lot.
Welcome to Kansas utilities. You know, I mean, if I understand this situation correctly, the LEAP funds did pay the intervening utility bills, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know,
paid it
this
for a
is
year. And
yeah.
it was supposed to be done, and whatever was left was supposed to go back. She
But it
never
didn't.
saw that money. It was always in Evergy's hands. But Evergy continued to go in, and they didn't put the stop on it and continued to take in the subsidy.
Right, but that did pay for the energy
Yeah.
she used. Correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So,
And, you know, like she said, she can afford to pay it, but a lot of people can't.
oh, I know. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a horrible thing, you know, to get that kind of a bill. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
many Kansans got those kind of bills after the winter freeze,
Yeah.
and that's still not straightened out. So.
Yeah, a lot of people very upset with the way KCC is handling things. There's a bill now that would basically make KCC membership an elected position because of it.
Yeah, and I think that there's a overall global conversation that needs to happen with the utilities, the energy rates that we see here in the state of Kansas. If you look at the various states around us, our energy costs are higher, and so ultimately, I think that we need to start actually getting to the root cause of what exactly that is causing that. And I have heard about the bill regarding the elections of KCC members, and so there might be a potential hearing on that in the future. I haven't specifically talked about that bill to that chairman, but I think that, you know, we do have to start looking at ways that we can start helping our constituents with these high electric rates, maybe not just within this program, but overall as a whole.
Yeah, definitely.
I concur.
Okay, well, that's good because we are running out of time, gentlemen. Thank you all so much. Casey, Blake, Diane, I really appreciate you joining me. You're always great guests. We'd also like to thank our news partners, the Wichita Eagle, KSN News, and Cake News for sharing their materials with us. I hope you've enjoyed our discussion as well as we have. We'd love to hear what you think about any or all of these topics. Just look for us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. My handle is Pilar Pedraza TV. For now, stay safe and have a great week.